Hello and welcome to the Green Room Podcast. I am Andrew Kent, the producer and co-host of the show, along here with my two co-hosts, Otto Keisker and Mark DiGiovanni. Unfortunately, last week I was out, but here I am back this week. And for the first time on this podcast, you are seeing my face. So I'm glad that everyone is seeing me on this podcast for the first time. If you didn't know, I've been on YouTube for the last 6 years by another name, Sven Soli. So now I have my face on two different YouTube channels, which is very exciting. This week, we are talking about running backs for the 2022 NFL Draft. We are only not that long if you guys think about it. We're not that far away. We are 66 days away from the 2022 NFL Draft, which is being held in Las Vegas this year. Real quick, though, last week, Mark and Otto gave their top 5 quarterbacks for this draft. Just to recap real quick, Mark ranked it number 5, Carson Strong, 4, Kenny Pickett, 3, Malik Willis, 2, Matt Corral, and number 1, Desmond Ridder, which ruffled a lot of people's feathers on TikTok this past week. Whereas for Otto, his ranking was at 5, Desmond Ridder, 4, Malik Willis, 3, Matt Corral, 2, Sam Howell, and number 1, Kenny Pickett. So clearly a big disagreement there between 1 through 5, but that's the whole point of this show. We love disagreements. That's exactly what we need in order to get the most out of the Green Room Podcast every single week. All right. Well, like I said, this week is about the running back position for the 2022 NFL Draft. And with this week's show, we'll begin with the strategy around drafting running backs in the NFL Draft. So, Otto, why don't you take it away from here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. And, having your face on this podcast probably going to lead to just a lot more views. Jumping into the strategy around running backs, this is an interesting one that we wanted to discuss, given the position, obviously, because running backs in the first round, it's starting to just not happen year over year. You're starting to find talent in those later rounds. So there's been discussion about when do you draft these guys, given the shelf life, some of the talent at the position, how much you want to pay them, and other things. So when I think about the strategy at running backs in the NFL Draft, I'm looking at running backs, if I'm a general manager, in probably the 3rd to 5th rounds, maybe a little bit in the 2nd rounds, but really the 3rd to 5th round. When I think about why, right, the first reason is, how much do you pay a guy who gets drafted in the first round, right? So on average, a first round pick, anywhere from 1 to 32, their guaranteed money throughout their rookie deal is just under $20 million, right? As to where anyone from the 3rd to 5th rounds drafted, their average guaranteed money of their rookie deal is under $1 million. So the amount that you're paying these guys is so much lower, right? So if you're going to pay someone that much more, you have to get that much more value. So then we have the conversation about, well, what's the difference between a running back that's drafted in the first round and one that's drafted in, again, the 3rd through 5th round? If you look back at it, there's not that much of a difference, right? We've found some great running backs in those middle rounds, in recent years here. 2 that come to mind immediately, Kareem Hunt and Alvin Kamara, right? But when you look at it outside of the first round specifically, and some of the guys who have been there in the 2nd in recent years, you're looking at Joe Mixon, you're looking at Dalvin Cook, you're looking at Miles Sanders, really some of the top tier guys, right? So you're getting them for, 1/20th of the price, right? And you're getting them in those later rounds. And then you think about this position. The other thing about this position is more and more teams are starting to move to a running back by committee style, right? We saw the Rams do it this year. We saw the Niners do it this year. Our Eagles, who led the league in rushing at the end of the regular season, they went to a running back by committee style. So I really think that investing so much in one player at a position that can be done in a committee style is not the right way to do it. And there's so much talent at the running back position because, you think about some of your best athletes at younger ages, they want the ball in their hands. So they become running backs when they start to play football. And then that translates. You pull some of the best athletes at that position, which is why when somebody gets hurt and the backup steps in, you don't see a lack of production and you're seeing more running back by committee approaches in the NFL. So that's kind of how I look at the strategy around drafting running back specifically in the NFL draft.
All right, Mark, and do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I have to agree with Otto. I think one thing about the running back is just the position itself. Think about every play, it's a car wreck for those guys. They're getting hit almost every play like the offensive lineman, which causes more injury. And just look at a guy like Saquon Barkley. A guy was a generational talent at Penn State, probably one of my favorite players of all time to watch. Just look what he has been doing in New York. It seems like every year that guy's getting injured. It's just the nature of that position, which is a shame to see because he is a generational talent. But I think I'm like Otto. I think really, if you want to draft a running back, it's got to be rounds 2 through 7. I would not invest a first round draft pick unless it was, pick like 32 and you needed a running back desperately, kind of like the Chiefs did when they won. They took Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That's a special exemption. If I was a rebuilding team, if I was a team, middle of the pack or the top of the draft, running back is not on my radar. Obviously, the key positions you need in this day and age are quarterback, offensive line, edge rushers, linebackers, safeties. That seems like the way the trend is going. So I have to agree with Otto. Not only do you save on money by drafting a running back in the later rounds, but there's always good talent. Look at Michael Carter, Javonte Williams, the 2 UNC backs from last year, having great years. So, you can always find value in the back end, and it's just the nature of the position. Why invest so heavy? Look at Ezekiel Elliott too down there in Dallas. He's always banged up.
Yeah. And to go off that, if I could just make one more point,
yeah.
Mark brought up Clyde Edwards-Helaire at pick 32, and it made me think about a lot of times you see these teams trade up to 32 to get a player that they can tack on a 5th-year option to, right? Because that's the perk of having your first round picks is that 5th-year option. However, with the running back position, that 5th-year option isn't necessarily a good thing. First of all, there's the shelf life. You don't know if they're going to last 5 years, just like Mark alluded to. And that's a great point in today's NFL. And then the other thing is that 5th-year option is not a cheap option, right? We're looking at $8-10 million, right? That's the same level that top tier running backs are being paid. So when you think about a 5th-year option for players at other positions, they're not necessarily paid top of their position money, right, to get that 5th year out of them. It's more of like, oh, we got this guy for a steal for 1 extra year. Instead, with running back, you're paying them top money, right? And you're worried about the shelf life. So the 5th-year option isn't even something that makes you want to draft that position in the first round. So I think in general, you stay away from it in the first round as much as you can.
Yeah, and Otto, it's going to be interesting too because you're bringing up top-tier money on 5th-year options. It's going to be interesting too to see, some of the running backs coming into free agency this year, see what kind of money they're going to get. Like Melvin Gordon, he went from the Chargers to the Broncos. He's a free agent again. What type of money is that guy going to get? What is Leonard Fournette going to get? Leonard Fournette, when he went from, the Jaguars to the Bucs, these are guys who already played on 2 teams already. I know they're in their mid-20s, but what are they possibly going to make in free agency? I think that's another interesting thing that I just thought of was, the running back market in general.
And if you're from around this area, you're probably a Penn State fan. So in a way, you were really disappointed when Saquon Barkley got picked 2nd overall by the Giants. But at the same time, you're probably really happy that the Giants picked him out of all the players picked there because he's been getting injured all the time. And if you look at all of these previous NFL drafts, and when a lot of times I'll go back and see some redrafts of the drafts, and almost every single time any running back that was picked in the first round, they are no longer picked in the first round in the redraft. So it goes to show you that teams don't value running backs very much, and nor should they really, because they don't have that long of a shelf life, as Otto was saying. But let's now move into a deep dive of the running back position and talk about what teams you guys think are in the market for a running back this year in the draft. Let's begin with Mark this time.
Yeah. It's hard to say. I know like we kind of went through, but I think two teams that come right to mind are the Miami Dolphins. Obviously I think they need a running back to help out Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, who's been pretty impressive the last season. So we'll see how he does now at Mike McDaniel. And we saw Mike McDaniel, how big he was in the run game, especially in San Francisco, with the blocking schemes and everything. Kyle Juszczyk had very high praise for him. So Miami comes to mind. And another team was one that you brought up, Andrew, is the Houston Texans. I mean, they're a team that pretty much needs every position at this point. So those are the two teams that come right off the top of the head for me.
What about you, Otto?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Mark's two teams. The two other teams that I'm looking at when I'm thinking about this off the top of my head are the Seattle Seahawks. They could add something there. Obviously, we don't know what's going on with Russell Wilson, but they could be looking to add someone. And then the other one is the Buffalo Bills, and specifically looking for probably a bigger back. Breece Hall comes to mind as one of the top guys who's a little bit of a bigger back. You want a Punisher up there in Buffalo, especially when it gets cold in the playoffs to control the game and the play clock. That's something they've lacked. Zach Moss hasn't worked out to this point. Devin Singletary is a good back, but they don't have that big guy. And sometimes it's Josh Allen, as we know, that serves as the short yardage back. And that's just not smart when you're paying a quarterback that much to have him be your running back on 4th and 1 and 4th and 2.
It breaks my heart that Otto, you mentioned the Bills and Mark, you mentioned the Dolphins, because 2 years ago for our fantasy draft, so me and Mark, we do a dynasty, as you know, Otto, and we had to pick a bunch of younger guys. So I picked Zach Moss, and he never panned out. I think Mark picked him up at one point this past year, then dropped him, and somebody else picked him up, then dropped him. So he's been all over the place in our league. And then Mark with the Dolphins, Myles Gaskin was one of my saviors 2 years ago. Unfortunately, I had really bad luck the last 2 years in fantasy in the final 2 rounds. But Myles Gaskin was huge for me. And he had a couple really good games this year. But towards the end, when he got injured, it looked like they weren't really using him anymore, which was super disappointing. And now I don't think he'll have much of a starting role moving forward, maybe somewhere else, but it's certainly not in Miami. But let's continue with this deep dive. I want to go over your top 5 running backs in this draft, as well as a late rounder who could be a sleeper out of the running backs this year. And what player in this position do you guys think could fit on the Eagles roster? Maybe mix him in with Miles Sanders. Could be really interesting. Who knows? The Eagles always like to draft running backs. So let's begin like you guys did last week with your top 5 running backs in this draft. Otto, if you want to lead it off at number 5.
Yeah, I'll start it off with number 5. Thanks, Andrew. My 5th back in this year's draft is Hassan Haskins from Michigan. 6'1", 220, 13.27 in yards last year. 4.9 per carry, though, is really what I look at more than the yards. But my evaluation of Haskins, he's very good at every element of playing the running back position. He's not someone who's going to blow you away. He's not somebody who has elite speed or great explosiveness. He's not an elite pass catcher, right? But he's someone who does every little thing right? So Haskins is a bigger back, like I said, 6'1", 220. He does a good job, though, of keeping his feet moving for a bigger back, and he's pretty elusive in tight quarters, right? Side-to-side shiftiness is there. He does a very good job for someone who's 6'1" of getting behind his pads and falling forward, right? We see some of these taller backs, and I'll get into it later with another guy in my top 5 who tends to run upright a little bit. Haskins does a good job of staying behind his pads. Good balance. His patience and his vision is questionable at times. Sometimes he runs up his lineman's back and just tries to put his head down instead of wait for a hole to be there. But at times he does show that patience and vision. So something to be worked on there. One part of Haskins' game that I really like, and I think out of the running backs I've looked at so far, he's the best in this year's class, is blocking. He's a very good blocker, not only in being able to block blitzing linebackers and defensive backs, but also the recognition of stunts and blitzes and who he needs to pick up. So Hassan Haskins is my number 5 running back in this year's draft.
And what about you, Mark? What would you have as your number 5?
I mean, this is tough. I keep going back and forth. Like, there's two guys I have on my list. So if I could do like a 5B, I'm going to put Baby Dalvin, aka James Cook from the University of Georgia. And 5A, I have Brian Robertson Jr. from Alabama. I keep going back and forth with these guys. One of the reasons is I'm kind of concerned with Brian Robinson. One, because he did play 5 years at the University of Alabama due to injuries, and he dealt with injuries all year. I think he has a lot of talent. He does have that extra year on him. So, I mean, it's going to be tough for him to see where he gets drafted. I really do like him. He's a big, powerful runner. He can also catch the ball in the backfield. He's a great blocker up front. And he was just a huge part of their offense when he was on the field. Though he was he was one of their biggest pieces in the 2020 national championship run. And then same for James Cook, another big guy out of Georgia. What I really like about him is that he did not have a huge workload. He split a lot of time with Zamir White. They kind of had that 1-2 punch, kind of like when Georgia had Michelle and Chubb, which I kind of like because he's got some fresh legs. And he's just a bowling ball back. Put him in between the tackles, and he will just run people over. So those like my 5A and 5B. Like I couldn't really choose like a distinctive 5 because like they're kind of the same for me. So that's why I liked.
I like it. All right, Otto, number 4.
Yeah, absolutely. My number 4 back in this year's class is Kenneth Walker, right, from Michigan State. And I know at one point he was probably hands down number 1 in this class. And I really like Kenneth Walker. So my evaluation of him, a little bit of a shorter back, 5'10", 210 pounds, 6.2 yards per carry this year. And by the way, that was 6.2 yards of not only carrying the ball, but carrying the Michigan State Spartans offense on his back. Like Mark just said about James Cook, Kenneth Walker is built like a bowling ball. Okay. Short, stocky, low to the ground, very, very good balance. Everything's compact on him. Great for short yardage because he's shorter behind the line, and he also packs that punch where he falls forward, right? One thing that I don't love about him, he has pretty tight hips. Not great as far as a shifty running back. He'll run you over, but he's not great as far as his lateral movement in tight spaces. He's got good straight line speed, but he's not going to run away from you necessarily. Good balance and good vision, and he's an okay blocker. One thing, though, Mark just noted it with Brian Robinson with being in his 5th year at Bama. One thing I don't love about Kenneth Walker, we've already talked about shelf life on this show. Kenneth Walker, I mean, he was the Michigan State offense, right? So he has taken so many hits already in his career. So the reason that I have him at 4 is partially because of that. And then I just don't see the explosiveness that will move him up the board to maybe the 2nd or 3rd round where I see the top running backs going. So that's why I have Kenneth Walker at my number 4 running back this year.
I'm sure that if it were up to you, you would not have any other rival of Penn State in the top 5. You probably weren't a big fan when Kenneth Walker was running through that entire Penn State defense. But
I was rooting for him though when he was running over Michigan, giving them their loss this year. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, mixed emotions.
Right, definitely. All right, Mark, take it away with number 4 for yourself.
It's actually funny enough. I swear to God, number 4 for me is also Kenneth Walker. The Kenneth Walker for Heisman was legit this year. Over 1,600 yards of yards this year. Absolute beast. Like Otto said, averaged 6.2 yards per carry and 18 touchdowns. But I really like Kenneth Walker a lot. But I did have a lot of mileage this year. As Otto said, he pretty much was the whole offense. Mel Tucker pretty much ran this kid into the ground. But there are some Le'Veon Bell-like qualities that I like in Kenneth Walker. And the one thing I really have the knock on him for, a reason he is at number 4 for me, is that he's not really a great pass catcher. And that's what we kind of want to see in the NFL. Some of these guys who can line up like a Christian McCaffrey in the slot, that way they're not getting banged up on every play. So that's why I have Kenneth Walker at 4. But the Kenneth Walker for Heisman hype was real. And I do like Kenneth, but I have him at 4.
I'm really hoping that pretty soon, too, we can have a massive debate when it comes to your number 1 picks. But before we get there, we have to get to the next couple. So, Otto, what's your number 3?
Yeah, my number 3 back is Isaiah Spiller in this year's draft, right, out of Texas A&M. So Spiller, 6'1", 215, a very tall running back, not filled out as much. So Haskins was 6'1" as well, right? Spiller's 215. Haskins is listed as 220, a little bit bigger, but when you look at him, Spiller really looks like a little bit, he's not as stocky, he's not as filled out, right? Average 5.6 yards per carry. Very good lateral quickness out of Isaiah Spiller. In the open field, he's going to make people miss, okay? Good vision and good patience. I really like that about Spiller. He's all right, straight line speed. His acceleration is okay. It's not great. He's patient in the backfield, right? And then the acceleration isn't great. So sometimes he doesn't make that first guy miss. He doesn't get to the second level. So that's one negative I have on him. But the biggest negative that I have on him is that he runs too tall. So he's a tall back as is at 6'1". Doesn't necessarily have the full frame to run people over, like, let's say, just a Derrick Henry, right? But he runs very upright. To my comp to it somewhat is Josh Adams from Notre Dame a while ago now. He runs very upright. So when people take him on, he doesn't run through them and he doesn't fall forward. If you turn on his tape, he's constantly falling backwards. So not great acceleration. Runs tall at times. And when you put those two things together and he's falling backwards, he's not a great short yardage back. So to me, he's not a guy who's going to be on the field every down. So that's why I have him here at 3. But like I said, I really like the side-to-side explosiveness, the movement in short spaces. He's also very good catching the ball out of the backfield. So I really like that. And he's a good route runner, has good hands. So Isaiah Spiller is my number 3 running back in this year's class.
Back to you, Mark. Who's your number 3?
Number 3, I think I'm going to throw you guys a curveball here. You guys are, I don't know if you guys are ready for this, but I got my guy, South Dakota State Jackrabbits, Pierre Strong Jr. And this guy has been so consistent at his time at South Dakota State. 3 straight seasons of 1,000-yard plus seasons. He's pretty fast, 4.5 40 time. Needs a little bit of a quicker burst, but what I really like about him is that he has a nose for the end zone. He has scored 35 touchdowns in his college career. He is very agile in his cuts, can work a little bit on his passing ability, but I really like Pierre Strong Jr. as a dynamic back from South Dakota State. So I think that's a little bit of a shock for everybody, but I just really like what I've seen from him on tape. And, the one thing that's really knocking him is coming from South Dakota State. Not a lot of people know who he is just because South Dakota State's not playing the best competition, but he's definitely a name to look out for. 3 straight seasons of 1,000 yards and 35 touchdowns in college career. I don't care who you're playing. That's pretty dang good.
Otto, before we go to your number 2, do you want to comment on that?
Not too many comments there. I've watched one game film of him. Good running back, but I don't have too much on him. He's just outside of my top 5. But to be honest, at this position, it's not one where I feel overly strong about certain players. So the guys that I have outside my top 5, I think are pretty close to being in my top 5. I don't think this class is very strong at running back, and I think there's short things separating them. But and again, the South Dakota State was part of why I had him outside of my top 5. A lot of the guys that I do have in my top 5, you're seeing they're from not only FCS schools, but they're from schools that are big name schools that played some of the best talent all year long. When you look at Michigan State, and then Texas A&M I'm not going to give away my top 2 obviously yet, but so no comments there. I do like the player. I just have him outside my top 5.
Yeah, Otto, I had to throw you a curveball, man. We can't just be going, I was like, what? I do like him. But yeah, no, I think that was a curveball for both of you guys. And like Otto said, running backs are pretty interchangeable. I just thought this guy was a great performer. And I think he definitely has a shot in my top 5 just because of what he's done in his college career. And, he's definitely a guy you could pick up in the 3rd or 4th round. And, everyone's like, oh, who's this guy? You know what I mean? So I definitely can see him. He definitely has to work on his run blocking ability, but very agile, can be a little bit faster, but I really like what I've seen from him. Especially 35 touchdowns and a lot of production. So I think that's the one thing that might hurt him just because of his production, but shelf life. But I do like the kid a lot.
South Dakota State seems like they pump out an awful lot of draft prospects despite being a pretty small school.
Hey, man, it would work for the Eagles. Dallas Goedert, South Dakota State. Come on, man.
So you got to do. Yeah, you got to pair the two.
The Jackrabbits, baby. The Jackrabbits.
Jackrabbits, you got to root for them. And not only college football, but when it comes to the NCAA tournament, they're always my 13 seed pick, baby. Let's go. I love them. You cannot root for the Jackrabbits. You know, they're just a really fun team. Really fun team. All right, Otto, let's take it away with your number 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I jump on my number 2, just one more point about South Dakota State. They're rivals with North Dakota State, so anybody who rivals Carson Wentz's school, I'm rooting for. My number 2 running back, though, is Breece Hall from Iowa State. Breece Hall, very, very good back. I think he could find his way into the second round this year. 6'1", 220 pounds, built really well. 5.2 yards per carry this year, 20 touchdowns. So to Mark's point, has a nose for the end zone. He's a big back, but he lowers his pads and he runs behind them, which is why I have him ahead of Isaiah Spiller. He's built to take some more hits. Good patience and good vision, very good acceleration. He's patient at times, right? He'll sit behind his O-line and wait for that hole to open up, whether or not it's maybe zone blocking or man blocking, but you see it more in their zone schemes. But when he sees that hole open up, he hits it. He's got great acceleration through there. He falls forward. He's not the most elusive back once you get him into space, it's pretty typical for these bigger backs. But he will drop a shoulder and he'll make you pay for hitting him, right? So we like that. He's not slow for a bigger back. He's not going to run away from you by all means in the open field, but definitely not a slow back. And he catches pretty well out of the backfield. He's an okay blocker. So I think he does a lot of things really well. I think there's some things about him that he does very well, which is why I have him as my number 2 running back. But I think this is going to be a guy who's a starter for a team for a while in the NFL, and you're going to be able to get him in the second, maybe even the third round this year.
Breece is that name for me that always came up in my head first when people talk about running backs for this year's draft class. So I think he's definitely, at least if he's not number 1, he's number 2 for most people. What about you, Mark? Who's number 2?
I actually have Breece Hall too. So I know it's funny how Otto and I have the same 4 and 2, but to Otto's point, I really like Breece Hall. Had a ton of production his last in 2020 and 2021. Matt Campbell, the head coach out there at Iowa State, has given this guy a lot of praise. In 2020, had over 1,500 yards. This year, had over 1,400 yards. Almost averaged 6 yards a carry both years. Had 21 touchdowns in 2020, 20 touchdowns in 2021. He's got great hands out of the backfield this year. He had 36 receptions for 302 yards. So yeah, I really like Breece Hall a lot too. And like Otto said, he's gonna when he runs into you, he's gonna take you out, kind of like a Derrick Henry. And I really like what Otto said too, like a patient back. Like we've seen Le'Veon Bell throughout all his years in the NFL was staying patient, letting the blocks develop, and you kind of see Derrick Henry do that too. And that's what I really like what about Breece Hall. Iowa State, they didn't have, they had big expectations this year. They came up short, but Breece Hall was one of their bright spots for sure.
Dang, I'm disappointed you guys have a lot of similarities here. I was kind of hoping for an explosive back and forth, but I should have seen it coming because of the running back position this year not being the strongest compared to years past. Maybe next week, though, you guys will explode against each other when it comes to the tight end and safety positions. All right, let's get right to each of yours number 1s. Otto, who is your number 1 overall running back in the 2022 NFL Draft?
Yeah, absolutely. There may still be some time for an explosion. My number 1 running back is Kyron Williams from Notre Dame. And Williams from Notre Dame, you're going to look at his numbers and you're going to say, okay, he didn't put up the biggest numbers. Notre Dame didn't probably utilize him as much as they maybe could have or should have, but they had some talent there on that offense this year. Williams, 5'9", 200 pounds. He's a smaller back, but he's built to take the hit, short and stocky, right? 4.9 yards per carry. What I really, really like about Kyron Williams is his ability to make guys miss in short spaces. Okay, you're going to turn on the tape on him and you're going to see free rushers that are going to have a straight shot at him 2 yards in the backfield, and they almost never bring him down. His movement in short spaces and his hips specifically are loose, right? It's really tough that you almost never see the first guy bring him down in any spot. So I really like that about Williams. On top of that, right, very good patience and vision. Again, just like we talked about with Breece Hall. To Mark's point on the patience aspect, you're starting to see this. It's starting to grow, and I'm wondering whether or not this is being coached now at the high school and college levels by coaches. When Le'Veon Bell came out, he was different. Nobody had that patience to sit behind an O-line and then hit it, right? And you have to be able to be explosive enough to be patient so that when that hole hits, you can hit it. And these guys that are now coming out, you're seeing more of this patience. Kyron Williams has that. He has the vision to see when a hole's coming. He's got the explosiveness to hit it and the patience, right? He's not a short yardage back. Obviously, he's not the biggest back, so that's probably my biggest knock on him. But he does catch the ball really well out of the backfield. And like Mark noted, running backs more and more in the NFL are being used as pass catchers out of the backfield. And Williams is a guy who not only catches well, but he's a very good route runner, specifically on those shake routes where it's 5 yards, you read the guy's hips, and you're either going to your left or going to your right. Quarterback reads it and he hits you. That's right. Kamara runs them the most out of all the running backs. Kyron Williams runs these really well. Loose hips, as I already alluded to, very good on that route. And then you get the ball in his hands in space and you let him make things happen. So Kyron Williams is my top running back in this year's draft. And before I hand this over to Mark, I just want to make one note that I thought was interesting in going through all of my top 5 and then a couple guys I evaluated outside my top 5. All of these guys throughout their college careers, 0 fumbles, which I thought was a very interesting statistic. So all of these guys, at least based off what they've done in the past, are going to take care of the football, right, and keep it in your hands, which is a huge, huge attribute for a running back to have in today's NFL.
Yeah, and we know many players that we've loved over the years who've not been able to handle the ball and cost them potential playoff berths or playoff wins, whatnot. So it's always nice to have a running back that holds on to that ball and doesn't cost you games. All right, Mr. Mark, let's hear your number 1. Who is your top running back in this year's draft?
Yeah, I just want to start out saying I love Kyron Williams. The reason I didn't put him in my top 5 was because of his height. That's really it. But I love Kyron Williams. He was such a dynamic player for them last year. He was pretty much like their best player at Notre Dame. So I really like Kyron Williams. But my top guy, I'm going to go with Isaiah Spiller from Texas A&M. He was the biggest part of their offense. Huge spark plug for them. He was a huge reason why they took down Alabama this year. Back-to-back seasons of 1,000 plus yards on the ground. Obviously a great pass catcher out of the backfield. And I think that's what I like about him. Like Otto said, he's a big guy. He's 6'1", and I think you can line him up in the slot too. So that way you can line him up in the slot and possibly have another running back in the backfield, just have 2 dynamic guys. But I really like Isaiah Spiller and his ability to catch the ball. Probably could work a little bit better on his pass blocking, but I like his ability, especially in that Jimbo Fisher offense where they do a lot of shotgun runs. He has a quick burst, and he's able to run out of the shotgun under center. So I think he's very dynamic in that sense too. So I really like Isaiah Spiller as my top guy.
Mark, I was hoping that maybe you'd say a few mean things about the Notre Dame player, Kyron Williams, but you're being nice this week. All right,
I really like him. I do.
I'll give you the benefit.
If we could just take a second though and get back to Mark's point. Mark, were you not a Darren Sproles fan if you don't like short running backs?
I mean, I love Darren Sproles, but I don't think I can see Kyron Williams. He's actually going to be my sleeper pick later on. It's going to be here's my sleeper pick was Kyron Williams. I think you can get him in so that's why I didn't have my top 5. I was like, oh, I'm going to have this guy.
I was going to say, I mean, if you're against short running backs, you might as well just hate, I don't know, Alvin Kamara, Boston Scott, Brian Westbrook, Darren Sproles. Jeez, a crow.
There's no hate for him. There's no hate. There's no hate. I'm just saying I had him because these other guys are bigger and they're probably going to last longer. So this is all about potential.
I'm just giving you a hard time. One thing though that I alluded to with Kenneth Walker that I actually think is helpful for shorter running backs, and I know Brian Westbrook has talked about it, is the ability to hide behind your line. Nobody sees you. So I think that's actually an advantage of being a smaller guy there. But I understand where you're coming from. And again, I like your points on Spiller. He is an explosive threat, both running the ball and out of the backfield catching it. So.
Yeah, and that's what I really liked about him too, because in that Jimbo offense, you watch a lot of their games. I mean, how many times is Zach Calzada in the shotgun? They do a lot of shotgun runs. You kind of see it now in the NFL. Like, I know we get mad at the Eagles when they run out of the shotgun, but that's kind of where the NFL is trending. A lot of teams do that. And, just seeing him do that in college and having that quick burst against, SEC type defenses, where pretty much like NFL minor league defenses, I think it will translate well to the next level. So that's what I really liked about him too.
Great. Well, with your top fives out of the way, let's get into the sleepers at the running back position in the 2022 NFL Draft. Mark, who are some sleepers you have at this position?
Yeah, I mean, my sleeper is going to be Kyron Williams. But another guy I like is Tyler Algier from BYU. He had a big year when Zach Wilson was there. He had a little bit bigger role at BYU. I think he's a guy you can definitely find in later rounds as well. I hope I'm saying that name right. But yeah, I really like Algier out of BYU.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll jump in. The two sleeper guys that I have here, Abram Smith from Baylor, very good back. He's a one-cut downhill running back, which I think is going to be very important at the next level. He doesn't dance. He's not going to lose yardage for you. So he's going to be a great rotational running back that could be in a running back by committee team, right? Will be good in short yardage, has some explosiveness to him. So he's a sleeper that I have there. And then my other one, and Mark already hit on this guy. Mark said he was his 5B. He was also my 6, so my 5B. James Cook. I mean, James Cook to me could be the steal of the draft at running back because arguably he's the most explosive guy in this draft. I think he's the fastest in straight line speed. We'll find out at the combine, I guess. But when you turn the tape on with this guy, he's running like the wind, and maybe it's just his hair that gives me the illusion like he's running really fast. But he flies, and the thing that I like most about him is that you can put him out as a receiver, and he's a mismatch for both safeties and linebackers. I mean, he was the biggest reason that they went out and beat Michigan as bad as they did in that college football semifinal. Nobody could cover this guy out of the backfield. And to what we've already talked about on the podcast, it's becoming more important that you have that guy that you can flex out of the backfield and play receiver. James Cook to me is probably the best one out of this year's draft. So he's that sleeper pick to me that whoever gets him is getting a steal.
Yeah, and another thing about James Cook too is like we alluded to earlier, he didn't have a ton of mileage because he split time with Zamir White. So I mean, that's a huge advantage. You're getting a guy who's fresh pretty much, and I really hope he goes to Minnesota. So that way he plays with his brother, and everyone's like, "Which one is that? Which guy is it?" They look exactly the same with the hair in the back.
It's already confusing enough with Madison being there too.
Exactly. Imagine if all three of them.
So it's the most annoying thing too in fantasy when you have a wide receiver or a running back on your team and you think it's your player getting all these yards and it just so happens to be the backup in there instead. I get so mad about that every single time it happens.
Or Andrew, when you have like an over-under on a receiver yards, like, oh yeah, let's go. And you're like, oh no, that was the slot receiver. Looks exactly the same.
It's so annoying. It's the most aggravating thing in all of sports when you're betting or when you're playing fantasy. But let's talk about the Eagles real quick too. So you guys mentioned a plethora of potential great running backs in the NFL. Out of all the running backs you mentioned, or maybe some running backs you haven't mentioned yet, which one do you think would fit best on the Eagles?
I can start this off first. I think the Eagles need a powerful back. I don't know what the deal is with Jordan Howard. I'm probably like Jordan Howard's biggest fan in Philadelphia, but I really love how he's a bowling ball back. And I think they need that to complement Miles Sanders. I mean, they already have a nice little receiving back with Kenny Gainwell and Miles Sanders. So I think they need a bowling ball. And I think a bowling ball that would work best for them would probably be a guy like Breece Hall, just because you can run him in between the tackles. But yeah, a guy like that. I kind of hope the Eagles go after Leonard Fournette in free agency, kind of like that bowling ball style, but we'll see what happens. But I think like a guy like that will definitely help the Eagles a lot.
Otto?
Yeah. I agree with all of Mark's points there. I think when you look at the Eagles running back room, I know there's rumors about them getting rid of Miles Sanders. I don't believe them. I do think Jordan Howard could be gone. There's just too much mileage on him at this point to bring back a guy that you're just going to constantly run up the middle. Although I love Jordan Howard, absolutely love him. So I think you have to fill that short yardage role, that bigger back role. To me, Breece Hall would be a guy who would fit, but I don't think that the Eagles will pick a running back that high, and I don't want them to, given other needs. So my guy is actually one that Mark had in his top 5. It's Brian Robinson from Alabama. I think you can get Robinson, in the 4th, maybe even the 5th round, and that's great. And then when you think about the way that the Eagles run the ball with the running back by committee style, the fact that Robinson's in his 5th year and maybe has, that shelf life may not be as long for him, it's not going to hurt as much in Philadelphia because he's only going to get 10 touches a game, right? So he's probably who I think would be the best fit for the Birds this year.
Yeah, no, that'd be so funny if they did get Brian Robinson Jr. because you get Tuscaloosa North, Hurts, Devontae, Dickerson, Brian Robinson. Why not? Why not just draft them all? I mean, they win a lot. They got to be good, right?
You're all about this Bama train too. I thought you hated the SEC in Alabama.
No, you got to pick those SEC guys, man. That's where all the top talent goes. If you look at where all these you look at the top recruiting classes this year, it's Texas A&M, Alabama, and Georgia. I mean, they're going to the SEC. That's where the top talent's going. If you're not drafting all SEC, then there's something wrong with you. Howie finally learned it after 20 years. He goes, I haven't picked a guy from Alabama. I'll pick 2 of them.
Well, you know what? As much as I hate Alabama, there is nothing more fun to say than Roll Tide.
Amen to that. Roll Tide.
Alrighty, guys, and let's get into our sleepers for the week. Last week, I know you guys had your sleepers, and this can be any position, so I'm curious what your sleeper of the week is this week. Otto, why don't you just start?
Yeah, funny as it is, last week I named a couple guys last week, but my main sleeper last week was the safety, and I am sticking with it this week. So my sleeper this week is Reed Blankenship, a safety from Middle Tennessee University. Reed Blankenship, you're going to turn on the film on this guy. He is all over the field. Really has a good understanding of what defenses are doing. He's not going to be a guy that tests off the charts. That's part of why he's going to be one of these late round picks. But he makes up for necessarily that that not having that top level athleticism by having a great understanding of defenses. That gives him that extra step to diagnose a play and get after it, whether or not it's a receiver screen, a slant underneath, whatever it may be. But he plays really well, mainly at Middle Tennessee. He played center field, played up the up top safety position, but he also does come down in the box every now and then and cover receivers face to face. But he's a guy with a great motor, very good play recognition, and a guy that I think can start at the next level that you're going to see go in the later rounds, Reed Blankenship.
What about yourself, Mark?
Yeah, I'm actually going to I know we talked about quarterbacks last week, but actually my sleeper right here is actually going to be a quarterback. And I'm going to go with Sam Hartman from Wake Forest University. Wake Forest had an incredible year this past college football season. I think they got as high as 8 in the top 10 rankings this year. I could be wrong. I have to double check that. But Sam Hartman was right at the forefront of it. He was 7th in the nation in passing yards with 4,228 yards. He was tied for 5th with touchdowns with 39 and had and it was 12th in QBR, which is 79.7. Hartman was a very good quarterback. Went head-to-head against Kenny Pickett in the ACC. Both teams in the ACC championship, both teams put up a lot of numbers in that game. Hartman was very impressive. Obviously he's not the most athletic guy in the draft, but he has great pocket presence, great pocket passer. And, if Wake Forest was Clemson, if they had the type of season that Clemson would have had, if they had that Clemson brand, they probably would have been in the top 4. But because they're Wake Forest, the committee did not give them the recognition they deserved. And it was just an incredible season from the Demon Deacons, and Sam Hartman was leading the charge there. So I'm going to go with Sam Hartman as my sleeper.
Real quick, Mark, who won that ACC championship game?
Pittsburgh.
Kenny Pickett won it?
Yeah, he did. But I'm just saying.
Okay. I know. I just wanted to hear you say it.
Yeah, no, I heard Kirk Herbstreit say this too during the college football.
Week, so.
He did. The Pickett did win, but I'm saying is during the season when Lake Forest was like 9-0 and 10-0, they were only ranked. I think the committee had them at 8, and Kirk Herbstreit was saying, well, think about it. If they had Clemson, who also plays in a weak conference, if they had the Clemson brand, they're going to be in the top 4. But because Wake Forest is Wake Forest, they didn't give them it, and they were just rolling teams this year, and they had a great year. So I mean, the Demon Deacons, great, love them. Former school produced Chris Paul and Tim Duncan. Why not? Why can't they produce more? So, Demon Deacons, baby.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mark. Outside of Clemson, nobody coming out of the ACC is going to get respect, for whether or not it's going undefeated or being a one-loss team. And it's unfair given the fact that they all play the ACC schedule. And Wake Forest did have a great year this year. I have to point out my guy Kenny Pickett whenever I get the opportunity to. So
I mean, hey, I don't blame you. That's your guy, man. It's your boy. All
right, boys. Well, let's go to the final segment here. Your draft crush of the week. Otto, who do you have as your crush of the week?
Yeah, my draft crush of the week this week is Jaquan Brisker from Penn State, the safety. So found myself breaking down some linebackers this week. I already turned on the tape on Brisker. I already had first-round grade on him. I'll tell you where he ranks among all safeties once we get to that episode. But I already love the kid, right? Had already also broken down Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State and Brandon Smith. So this week I'm working on Ellis Brooks and Jesse Lukita, and I'm just trying to watch those two. And every single play, number one, is right by the football. No matter what, pass play, run play, there's Jaquan Brisker. There's Jaquan Brisker. Third and short, makes a stop, there's Jaquan Brisker. Fourth down, Jaquan Brisker. He's everywhere. He's all over the field. And when you try to turn on the tape and watch someone else, and this guy just continues to consume your head, you can't get him out of your head when you're thinking about who do I want on my team. And so Jaquan Brisker is my draft crush for the week because I was trying to watch Lukita and Ellis Brooks, and all I saw was Jaquan Brisker.
And what about you, Mark? What player would you like to take out on a date this week from the NFL draft?
Yeah, I love Jaquan Brisker, man. At Penn State defense, we were number 2 in the country behind Georgia. And, of course, James Franklin blows it like he does every year. It's just a shame because Penn State should have been playing in the Final Four. That's another story for a different day because I can go on and on about this season, how they should have been better, but I'm not. My guy, actually, I've loved this guy for a while, but I'm going to go with George Pickens, UGA wide receiver. Hasn't been the biggest, was a highly retired recruit coming out of high school, has made some big plays at Georgia. He had that one big play in national championship, then kind of faded away. He's dealt with some injuries, but I really like George Pickens. Huge receiver, 6'4", big body, huge catch radius. And the big thing I like about him, he's got a quick burst. He's not just a big guy who's just going to go up there and make the catches like an Alshon Jeffrey. He's like a DK Metcalf. He'll go up, make the catch, and absolutely leave you in the dust. So that's my guy, George Pickens, kind of flying under the radar. Kind of had some down seasons, but he is a national champion. But yeah, I really like George Pickens a lot.
Yeah, I think Pickens for me, I love the player. Interested to see how he's going to test as far as the injury goes at the scouting combine once the medical guys get to test him out and make sure he's okay. If he clears everything at the combine, you're going to see that guy rise up draft boards really, really quick compared to where he is right now. I really like the talent he's got.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just I mean, we're so far away from the draft. We'll see him at the scouting combine, but like what you've seen him do, like on the field, is just incredible when that kid's healthy.
All right, boys. Well, it looks like that's all the time we have for tonight. Hopefully next week I can get some better lighting in here. I do have some professional lights. Just didn't have the energy in me to put them up tonight. My face is very dark, as you can tell. But next week it'll all look better. I'm sure there'll be some hot takes when we dive into the tight end and safety positions. Looking forward to hearing both of Mark and Otto's picks, their top 5 sleepers. Everything we'll cover it here on the Green Room podcast. As always, thank you guys all so much for watching. Once again, I'm Andrew Kent, your producer and co-host, along with Otto Keisker, Mark DiGiovanni. We will see you all again next week.